June 3, 1943, Hearne, Texas. The train lurched to a halt, metal groaning against metal, and through the barred windows came something the German soldiers hadn't seen in months. Sunlight without smoke, clean, blinding, unbroken by ruins. They pressed their faces against the glass, these men of Rommel's Afrika Korps, and saw cotton fields stretching to the horizon like an ocean frozen white. Farmhouses stood whole, roofs intact, windows gleaming. A windmill turned lazily in the distance. One prisoner whispered in disbelief, "This is the enemy?" And in that moment, staring at a land untouched by war while their homeland burned, they realized something that propaganda had never prepared them for. America wasn't just winning. America had never stopped being peaceful. Before we dive into this story, if you're enjoying these deep dives into forgotten history, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, whether you're in Texas, Berlin, or anywhere in between. Your support helps us uncover more of these incredible untold stories. Now, let's continue. The journey had begun months earlier in the dust and defeat of Tunisia. When the Afrika Korps surrendered in May 1943, over 150,000 Axis soldiers became prisoners of war. They had expected execution, perhaps starvation in some desert camp. Instead, they found themselves loaded onto ships bound for a continent they knew only through distorted newsreels and bitter propaganda. Franz Müller, a 23-year-old corporal from Stuttgart, had spent 2 years fighting in North Africa. He'd survived sandstorms that buried tanks, British artillery that turned night into day, and the slow realization that Rommel's supply lines were collapsing. When he raised his hands in surrender near Tunis, he carried 3 things: sand in his boots, a photograph of his mother, and the certainty that his war had ended badly. The Atlantic crossing took 3 weeks. Below deck, in converted cargo holds, the prisoners traded rumors. Some said they'd be used as slave labor in American factories. Others whispered that Roosevelt had promised Stalin he could have German prisoners for Siberian camps. A few optimists mentioned the Geneva Convention, but were quickly silenced. "Treaties are for peacetime," an older sergeant muttered. "This is war." Yet when they arrived at Norfolk, Virginia, the first shock came in the form of coffee. Real coffee, hot and black, served in clean cups by American Red Cross workers. One elderly woman smiled and said, "Welcome to America, boys." Müller stared at the cup in his hands. In 2 years of fighting, no one had welcomed him anywhere. The train ride through the American South revealed a country that seemed to exist in a different reality. Through the windows rolled endless fields of corn, tobacco, cotton. Towns passed with church steeples rising above tree-lined streets. Children waved from platforms, not with hatred, but curiosity. The prisoners fell silent, each man processing what he saw against what he'd been told. Germany in 1943 was rubble and ration cards. America was harvest and plenty. Camp Hearne sprawled across 720 acres of Texas prairie. Nearly 150 buildings stood in neat rows, each barrack freshly painted, roofed with tar paper against the brutal Texas sun. Guard towers rose at intervals, but the sentries seemed almost casual. Rifles slung low, more interested in the baseball game happening beyond the fence than the prisoners filing through the gates. Major Robert McKnight, the camp's first commandant, addressed them through an interpreter. His voice was firm but not cruel. "You are prisoners of war. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work. You will eat. You will not be harmed. The words landed like stones in water. Muller watched the ripples of confusion spread through the assembled men. This didn't sound like captivity. It sounded like a promise. The first meal confirmed it. In the mess hall, long tables held trays of roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, and bread, soft white bread, not the sawdust loaves they'd eaten in Africa. Coffee flowed freely. There was even butter. Muller ate slowly, each bite an accusation against everything he'd believed. They feed prisoners better than we fed ourselves as soldiers, someone whispered. No one argued. That night, lying on clean mattresses in heated barracks, Muller pulled out pencil and paper. He'd started keeping notes, trying to make sense of the contradiction. We are prisoners, he wrote, but we have more freedom than we did under our own command. We have more food than our families in Germany. How can this be defeat? The camp routine emerged quickly. Roll call at dawn. Work assignments by 0700 hours. But the work itself defied expectations. Some prisoners were assigned to carpentry shops, building furniture for the camp. Others tended gardens, coaxing vegetables from the red Texas clay. There was a camp library, initially stocked with a few dozen books, which grew weekly as prisoners requested titles and American authorities approved them. Shakespeare, Goethe, American Westerns. By August, Camp Hearne held 4,800 German prisoners. Among them were farmers, mechanics, teachers, musicians. They organized themselves with German efficiency, establishing classes in English, mathematics, even art. A prisoner named Wilhelm Bartels, once a graphic designer in Hamburg, began teaching wood carving. Within weeks, the Camp PX was selling intricate carvings to guards and visitors' boats, animals, chess sets, carved from scrap lumber, with tools the Americans provided. The Americans watched this transformation with bemused approval. To them it made practical sense. Idle prisoners caused trouble. Busy prisoners maintained order. But for the Germans, the ability to create, to learn, to organize without constant surveillance felt revolutionary. They trust us with knives and saws, one prisoner marveled. They trust us to not be animals. The music started in September. Someone found an old upright piano in a storage building, battered but functional. A prisoner named Otto Klein, who'd played in a Munich beer hall before the war, spent 3 days tuning it by ear. The first night he played, prisoners gathered in silence as Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata drifted across the compound. Even the guards stopped their rounds to listen. Soon there was an orchestra, violins made from wood scraps and wire, drums fashioned from mess tins and stretched canvas. The camp commandant approved the purchase of real instruments from a music store in Houston. By Christmas 1943, Camp Hearne had a 20-piece orchestra performing concerts every Saturday night. American guards brought their wives and children to listen. The music transcended the wire, proving that culture survived even in captivity. But the real revelation came when prisoners were allowed to work outside the camp. Texas in 1943 faced a critical labor shortage. Millions of American men had shipped overseas, leaving farms desperate for hands to harvest cotton, bale hay, repair equipment. The War Manpower Commission approved the use of POW labor, and by autumn, trucks were hauling German prisoners into the countryside every morning. Muller found himself assigned to a cotton farm 30 miles from camp. The Johnson family farm had been in operation since 1887, 200 acres of white cotton stretching under an impossibly blue sky. William Johnson, 62 years old, with hands like leather, greeted the prisoners with a simple nod. "We got work to do," he said through an interpreter. "Pick gentle. Don't damage the bowls." For 8 hours they worked the rows, fingers quickly learning the rhythm of separating fiber from plant. The sun hammered down, turning their backs red, but the work was honest and finite. At noon, Mrs. Johnson brought lemonade in mason jars, cold from the ice house, and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. She set them on a truck tailgate without fear, without contempt. "You boys must be hungry," she said, and walked back to the farmhouse. Muller held the lemonade, condensation dripping down the glass, and felt something crack inside him. This woman's son was probably fighting in Italy or France, trying to kill men wearing the same uniform Muller had worn. Yet she brought him lemonade, made him sandwiches, treated him like a human being doing hard work under a hot sun. "Why?" he asked the guard, a young private from Dallas named Ellis. "Why does she treat us kindly?" Ellis shrugged. "You're just soldiers, same as us. War's not your fault, not really. You got unlucky, is all." He spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Besides, you work hard. My daddy always said, respect a man who does his work proper." The wages surprised them most. According to the Geneva Convention, prisoners received 80 cents per day for their labor, the same as civilian farmhands. The U.S. government kept 20 cents for camp expenses, but each prisoner could keep 60 cents. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was acknowledgment that their labor had value, that they remained participants in an economic system rather than slaves. At the camp PX they could buy cigarettes, candy, toiletries. Small dignities that reminded them they were still men. By winter the relationship between captors and captives had evolved into something neither side expected. Mutual respect born not from ideology, but from simple daily interactions. Guards learned prisoners' names, asked about their families. Prisoners taught guards German phrases, laughed at their terrible pronunciation. When a guard's wife had twins, the prisoners carved an elaborate cradle and presented it anonymously. When a prisoner received news his mother had died in an Allied bombing, the guards allowed him time alone and didn't count it against him. Yet guilt shadowed every kindness. Letters from home arrived irregularly, filtered through censors, often months old. They painted pictures of a Germany collapsing under relentless bombing. Muller's mother wrote in February 1944, "The bakery is gone. Most of our street is gone. I sleep in the cellar now. We wait for the sirens and pray." He read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in his footlocker beneath socks and cigarettes. That night the camp grew quiet. Men who had joked at dinner sat in silence. The contrast was too stark, too painful to ignore. Here they had 3 meals a day, heated barracks, medical care, entertainment. Their families huddled in rubble, starving, terrified. The kindness that had seemed miraculous now felt like judgment, a daily reminder that Germany had started a war it could never win against a nation whose power wasn't in cruelty, but in abundance. The Americans produced everything. The prisoners saw it in the endless supply trucks that arrived at camp, in the quality of their boots and uniforms, in the casual way guards discarded items that would be treasured in Germany. One day, watching a guard throw away a nearly full pack of cigarettes, Muller did the math. America produced enough to waste what Germany hoarded. The industrial capacity that mattered in modern war wasn't measured in tanks or planes alone, but in the system that could feed, clothe, and supply millions while still maintaining civilian comfort. We were told Americans were soft, a prisoner named Klaus said one evening, spoiled by luxury, unable to endure hardship. He gestured at the camp around them, at the guards laughing over a card game, at the trucks that would carry prisoners to work tomorrow. But this is their hardship. Even their prisons have abundance. How do you fight a nation that's barely sacrificing? The question had no answer, only implications. The same system that treated prisoners humanely was mass-producing Liberty ships, B-17 bombers, and Sherman tanks. American factories ran 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. Women worked assembly lines. Teenagers collected scrap metal. The nation mobilized not through terror but shared purpose. Germany's strength was militarism. America's strength was productive capacity joined to democratic mobilization. In May 1944, news reached camp that the Allies had entered Rome. Prisoners clustered around radios in stunned silence. The front was collapsing. Italy had switched sides. The Reich, meant to last 1,000 years, was shrinking daily. Some clung to hope's secret weapons, miracle tanks, rumored jets. Most had done the math, calculated industrial ratios, and seen evidence piled in American surplus. That month, civilians organized a picnic near the camp. Families from Hearne brought food and tables beneath oak trees beyond the wire. Children played while adults ate fried chicken and potato salad. A few prisoners joined under guard. Muller sat stiffly as Farmer Henderson asked about Germany, crops, and soil. "My grandfather came from Bavaria," Henderson said. "Left in 1882, missed the mountains. He offered apple pie. Guess that makes us almost cousins. Almost cousins under a Texas sky while Europe burned." Muller tasted the pie and understood. Americans were winning not because they hated better, but because they'd built a society producing pie and bombers, maintaining normalcy while projecting force. They industrialized war while remaining civilian. On June 6, 1944, news of Normandy arrived. Guards celebrated quietly. Prisoners felt a physical blow. Germany now fought east, south, and west. Defeat became mathematical. Some withdrew into silence. Others buried themselves in work, music, distraction. Muller wrote, "We believed strength meant hardness and sacrifice. America shows strength as maintaining humanity. They feed us well because they can. They're fair because cruelty isn't required. We mistook kindness for weakness. It was power to be merciful." Summer followed with quiet industry. Gardens produced tomatoes, beans, squash. Prisoners cultivated growth instead of ruin. The orchestra added jazz to classical. Workshops sold furniture, funding recreation. There were soccer leagues, chess tournaments, a German newspaper. Rituals formed. Saturday concerts, Sunday soccer guards versus prisoners, ending with handshakes. Holidays mixed traditions, Christmas trees with stars and angels. Easter hunts, where guards' wives organized games and prisoners carved wooden eggs. Beneath routine lay certainty. By autumn, Soviet forces reached Poland. Allies swept France. Letters spoke of chaos and erased cities. One November message said, "Everything is gone. Don't expect recognition." The day came May 8, 1945. Major McKnight announced surrender, removed his cap, and explained repatriation. No one cheered. Germany they'd left no longer existed. Yet in a Texas camp, treated with decency, they'd witnessed the difference between domination and productivity, fear and organization. Repatriation began late 1945. Prisoners departed in groups, issued clothes and papers. In November, Muller waited his turn, carrying his journal, letters, and a small wooden Texas longhorn carved by Wilhelm Bartels. The wire, the fields, and the routines lingered with him, shaping how he measured power, dignity, work, and the fragile possibility of peace, long after war had officially ended. Ellis, the guard who'd worked the Johnson farm detail, found him in line. "Hey, Muller." He handed him a photograph, the Johnson farm, taken from the road, cotton fields, white in afternoon sun. "Thought you might want to remember." Muller took it carefully. "Why did you do this? All of this? The kindness?" Ellis considered the question. "Because the war don't last forever, but how we act during it, that lasts. We wanted you folks to see that Americans ain't monsters, that there's another way." He extended his hand. "Take care of yourself." They shook hands, captor and captive, a small defiance of everything war tried to make them become. Returning to Germany shocked Muller more than captivity. His train reached Frankfurt in January 1946, a city of rubble and ghosts. His mother lived outside Stuttgart in one room of a farmhouse. When he found her, she was thinner, grayer, aged beyond her years. She held his face and cried, "You're alive." He wanted to tell her about Texas cotton fields, lemonade, music, but couldn't explain abundance to someone who had forgotten fullness. He only said, "I'm home," though the word had lost meaning. As Germany rebuilt, Muller and others carried memories of American captivity that didn't fit the story of victor and defeated. They had seen not just military power, but a civilian system that fought a global war while sustaining prosperity. Some returned to America as immigrants. Others stayed silent, unable to explain kindness from an enemy to a nation steeped in guilt. All understood that victory came less from battles than from industrial capacity, organization, and a society that could mobilize without becoming warlike. In 1952, Muller opened a small machine shop in Stuttgart, helped by Marshall Plan aid. Remembering the trust shown at Camp Hearne, he ran his business on dignity and fair wages. A photograph from the Johnson farm hung on his wall. If asked, he spoke of cotton, lemonade, and learning more about winning there than fighting for Rommel. The kindness wasn't weakness. America defeated Germany by showing democratic capitalism could outproduce authoritarian militarism while remaining humane. That realization never faded. Cruelty was required for one system to function, not the other. Camp Hearne closed, but its legacy endured proof that victory meant remaining human, and that the future belonged to nations able to wage war without losing themselves. That was the shock German prisoners never recovered from, not the defeat, but the kindness, not the captivity, but the abundance, not the wire, but what lay beyond it. An America at war that looked like peace, felt like prosperity, and won through being exactly what it claimed to be.